Many spiritually awake people secretly struggle with lust because spiritual awakening doesn't erase human desire. It intensifies self-awareness, which makes every internal movement more visible. When someone begins to wake up spiritually, they often expect old temptations to disappear, as if enlightenment automatically dissolves physical impulses. But the opposite usually happens. Awakening pulls back the curtain on everything happening inside you, your thoughts, your cravings, your emotional patterns, your wounds, and yes, even your sexual desire. Instead of being buried or ignored, these impulses rise to the surface with new intensity because you are finally conscious enough to notice them. Lust becomes a challenge not because spiritually awake people are weaker, but because they are more aware of the tension between the physical body and the higher self. Before awakening, people may act on desire impulsively without thinking. They might consume, chase, or indulge without questioning the deeper motivations behind their urges. But once consciousness expands, every action, every emotion, every temptation feels amplified. You feel the pull of desire and the pull of your spiritual values at the same time, and that friction can be overwhelming. Another reason spiritually awake individuals struggle with lust is that awakening often unlocks dormant energy, especially the kind that flows through the lower chakras or primal layers of human experience. This energy, when not understood, can manifest as intensified sexual urges. Many people confuse this with moral failure, not realizing that heightened sensuality is sometimes a natural byproduct of spiritual activation. The body becomes more alive, more sensitive, more attuned. Energy moves more freely, and if it's not guided or grounded, it tends to channel itself through the easiest outlet, desire. Lust also becomes a secret struggle because spiritual people often feel that they're not supposed to deal with it. They believe desire means they're not pure enough, awakened enough, or disciplined enough. This creates shame, an inner judgment that makes the problem harder to address honestly. Instead of exploring where the desire comes from, they hide it. Instead of understanding it, they suppress it. And the more spiritually aware someone becomes, the more they fear being inauthentic or unworthy if they admit they still deal with very human impulses. But spiritual awakening isn't about becoming less human. It's about becoming more conscious of your humanity. Lust reveals itself strongly because awakening brings light to the shadows, the parts of ourselves we've ignored, denied, or pushed away. And when that shadow includes desire, it can feel like you're wrestling with something that contradicts your spiritual identity. Yet this struggle is not a contradiction. It's a sign of inner growth. Your awareness is expanding, and with that expansion comes the responsibility to understand yourself more deeply. Ultimately, the spiritually awake don't struggle with lust because they're failing. They struggle because they can finally see the layers of desire clearly enough to confront them. The intensity is not a punishment, it's a reflection of heightened awareness. This is the hidden truth. Awakening doesn't silence lust, it exposes it, revealing it as a part of the human experience that must be understood, integrated, and transformed rather than denied. Lust becomes challenging not because someone is less spiritual, but because spiritual awakening makes the inner world louder, clearer, and harder to ignore. When consciousness expands, you don't just become more aware of peace, love, intuition, and purpose. You also become more aware of your impulses, attachments, and unresolved patterns. Lust is not an exception. In fact, it often becomes one of the clearest reflections of the tension between your evolving spirit and your still human nature. Before awakening, many people move through life unconsciously. They feel desire and follow it automatically, without questioning why it appears or what emotion is fueling it. In that state, lust doesn't feel like a struggle, it simply feels like life. But once someone begins to wake up spiritually, they start noticing things they never noticed before. The subtle emotional triggers behind desire, the need for connection underneath attraction, the craving for validation disguised as physical interest, or the loneliness hiding inside the urge for intimacy. This awareness doesn't weaken temptation. It intensifies it by making its roots visible. Spiritual sensitivity makes temptation more noticeable because you're no longer numb. Your mind becomes sharper, your emotions more transparent, and your internal patterns more exposed. What once felt like a simple urge suddenly feels like a spotlight shining on your inner contradictions. You see your intentions and your impulses side by side. You see the gap between what your higher self wants and what your body desires. And navigating that gap can feel exhausting. People often imagine that spiritual awakening is a smooth upward path, pure thoughts, pure emotions, pure behaviors. But real awakening is more like turning up the volume on everything inside you. You feel more deeply, you perceive more clearly, you sense the energy behind every desire, including the ones you wish you didn't have. Lust doesn't become easier. It becomes more transparent, more complex, and sometimes more intense because you're no longer running on autopilot. Another layer of this struggle comes from how spiritually awake individuals interpret their urges. They often believe that experiencing lust means they are failing their spiritual path. This belief creates internal pressure. If I were truly awakened, I wouldn't feel this. But this isn't true. Awakening does not erase biology. It does not switch off hormones. It does not remove the emotional need for connection or the psychological patterns tied to attraction. Instead, it reveals them. And for many, that revelation feels like a confrontation with parts of themselves they didn't expect to meet so boldly. Some begin to judge themselves harshly. Others try to suppress their impulses. But suppression only strengthens desire. The more you try to silence lust, the louder it becomes. This is why many spiritually aware people secretly struggle. Their intention to be pure unintentionally amplifies the very thing they're trying to hide. The truth is that the conflict arises because the spiritually awake can feel both forces at once, the pull of the soul and the pull of the body. They recognize the higher path but still carry human impulses, and this dual awareness creates tension that non-spiritual individuals might not feel as intensely. In reality, the presence of lust is not a sign of spiritual weakness. The awareness of it is a sign of spiritual maturity. It means you can see the inner workings of your desire clearly enough to work through them consciously. The struggle isn't proof that you're failing, it's proof that you're evolving. The struggle with lust becomes even more complicated because so many people misunderstand what it truly means to be spiritual. They assume that spiritual growth is about becoming emotionless, desireless, or detached from anything physical. They believe that wanting, craving, or feeling sexual attraction is a sign of moral or spiritual weakness. But this belief is not only incorrect, it is one of the main reasons spiritually awake people suffer silently. They feel guilty for being human. They feel ashamed for having instincts. They feel torn between their spiritual identity and their natural impulses. And this internal conflict makes lust feel heavier, more taboo, and more difficult to manage. Many spiritually aware individuals take the wrong approach. They try to suppress desire. They push it down, deny it, or label it as wrong. But suppression never dissolves desire, it actually magnifies it. The more you try to silence an impulse, the more power it gains in your subconscious. Suppressed desire becomes distorted desire. What could have been understood and integrated instead becomes a secret battle. And the spiritually awake often blame themselves for a struggle that is normal, natural, and part of the human experience. True spiritual growth doesn't come from pretending you don't have desires. It comes from understanding them, seeing where they come from, what they're trying to express, and what deeper emotional need might be behind them. Lust is rarely just about physical attraction. Often it's rooted in loneliness, a longing for closeness, a need for validation, or a desire to escape emotional discomfort. Lust can appear when someone feels disconnected from themselves, empty, stressed, or unfulfilled. It can also arise during periods of transformation, when old emotional layers are coming to the surface. When these deeper layers go unexamined, even spiritually awake individuals can find themselves caught between two worlds, their higher intentions and their unresolved emotional wounds. They can meditate, pray, study, and reflect, all while still feeling the pull of unhealed parts of themselves. And because they believe they shouldn't struggle, they don't allow themselves to explore the truth behind their desire. This misunderstanding turns lust into a secret burden, a private fear that they are failing, regressing, or contradicting their spiritual path. But the truth is much simpler. The spiritually awake feel this struggle more intensely, precisely because they are awake. They perceive not just the desire itself, but the emotional, psychological, and energetic patterns feeding it. They see the difference between what their soul wants and what their wounded parts crave. And that clarity can be overwhelming if they don't know how to navigate it. The real purpose of this struggle is not to shame you, it's to reveal you. It shows what needs healing, where you need self-compassion, and what parts of you are still seeking attention. Lust becomes a teacher, not an enemy. It points toward unmet needs, buried feelings, and opportunities for inner alignment. When spiritually awake, people learn to understand and integrate these impulses instead of fighting them. The struggle loses its intensity. They stop seeing lust as a threat to their spirituality and start seeing it as a doorway to deeper self-awareness. In the end, the battle between higher intention and human impulse isn't a sign of spiritual failure. It's the natural process of becoming whole. The path forward isn't shame or denial, it's integration. Understanding that desire is not something to be feared or rejected, but something to be navigated with awareness. Many spiritually awake people spend years battling lust as if it were an enemy, not realizing that resisting it only tightens its grip. True spiritual growth is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming honest. It's about acknowledging the full spectrum of your humanity while choosing not to be controlled by it. Integration begins when you stop seeing desire as a contradiction to spirituality. Lust does not mean you're unaligned, impure, or regressing. It simply means you're human, alive, emotional, and wired for connection. Spiritual awakening doesn't turn you into a blank slate. It turns you into a clearer mirror. It reflects every part of you, including the parts you'd rather not see. And the spiritually mature don't hide from this reflection. They face it with compassion. One of the biggest shifts happens when people realize that desire only becomes dangerous when it's unconscious. When you don't understand the emotional roots behind your impulses, lust becomes a reaction rather than a choice. But when you become conscious of what drives your cravings, loneliness, curiosity, stress, unmet needs, or even simply the biological rhythms of the body, lust loses its power to control you. You move from reacting to responding, from compulsiveness to clarity, from shame to understanding. Integration also requires reframing desire itself. Instead of seeing lust as a force pulling you away from your spiritual path, you begin to see it as an invitation to explore deeper parts of yourself. Lust can reveal emotional wounds you haven't healed, or highlight areas where you crave connection, affirmation, or intimacy. It can teach you about your boundaries, your cravings, and your unmet emotional needs. In this way, lust becomes a teacher, not because it's holy, but because it exposes what still needs attention. Another crucial aspect is self-compassion. Many spiritually awake individuals judge themselves harshly for feeling desire, thinking, if I were truly spiritual, I wouldn't struggle with this. But this expectation is rooted in misunderstanding. Spirituality does not erase your humanity. It refines your relationship with it. You can be deeply conscious and still grapple with primal urges. You can have profound insight and still face temptation. This doesn't make you less awakened, it makes you whole. When people accept this truth, the internal battle softens. They stop trying to force themselves into an unrealistic image of spiritual purity. They stop hiding their humanity under a mask of virtue. And instead they step into authenticity, a state where desire can be acknowledged, explored, and understood without shame. The final stage of integration is alignment, choosing actions that reflect your values even when your impulses pull you elsewhere. This doesn't mean eliminating desire, it means becoming strong enough to navigate it consciously. You learn to feel without being ruled by feeling. You learn to acknowledge impulses without collapsing into them. You learn to let desire pass through you without letting it define you. Your spiritual path isn't about perfection. It's about truth. And the truth is that lust does not make you weak or unworthy. The struggle shows that you are aware, evolving, and actively transforming. It reveals that you are no longer living unconsciously, but are engaged in the deeper work of understanding yourself. In the end, the battle with lust is not a sign that you're failing spiritually. It's a sign that you're growing spiritually. Because real growth isn't the absence of struggle. It's the ability to navigate struggle with clarity, intention, and compassion. Integration turns lust from a source of shame into a doorway for inner transformation.